So the first thing I want to mention here is that what we're here to discuss is not just the practical application of design, like UX, UI, visual design, etc. Rather, this is a seriously, really, really awesome group of heavy hitters that's really here to discuss how design methodologies are being employed to design everything from products to organizations to full-blown business strategies and more. So to that end, we should have added design strategy to the title, but now you know, right? There's a lot more to design in healthcare than just the pixels and pushing them around. So here we go. We're going to start with some brief introductions, and to make it easy, I'm just going to call on each person and give you a little context about where I know them from, and then we'll go from there. And so each of you, if you don't mind, I'll call on you and if you could tell us a little bit about you. So I'm going to start with Dana and Anselmo. We've had some really great deep discussions about pharma and design and other things, mostly over drinks. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yes. Hello, everyone. As Justin mentioned, I am Dana Anselmo. I have been in the biotechnology pharma space for a little over 20 years, spanning a wide range of teams and functions, including quality control, clinical operations, regulatory strategy in terms of interpreting FDA guidance in order to get products onto the market, marketing, and patient support services. I'm currently at Genentech, based in South San Francisco. I've been at the company for 10 years, and I'm a member of the engagement and experience design team, really focused on patient voice and patient experience and how we can optimize those experiences for our patients when they're taking our products.
Very cool. Thanks, Dana. I'm so excited to get deep into that, as much as you can share, of course.
Of course.
All right, so next I'm going to move to Camille. You're a DMBA grad, an alum with a ton of healthcare startup experience. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from, professionally speaking, of course, or otherwise.
Sure. Thanks, Justin. Well, I was born in Minnesota and then I moved to, anyways, just no, but I was, so I have been in healthcare for about a decade now. I made the jump into this space very shortly after starting my career in advertising, of all places. We did a pro bono project for a hospital group at the time, and I was just hooked. We can tell more about that story some other time. But since then, I've kind of made the tour through some of the big names like Joyce, and I think like a lot of people who spend enough time in healthcare, made a pit stop in Kaiser for a couple of years. So this very big national integrated health system. I've been at 2 startups since then, one working in the chronic condition space and diabetes and hypertension, and some of these kind of ongoing, very, very tricky and very costly to both people and families and the healthcare system more broadly, conditions. And then for the last year and a half or so, I've been in a very, very interesting, very important, and like deeply unsexy space of healthcare insurance, which is so interesting because I have, all the years I've been in healthcare, of course, insurance and the ability to pay for the care that you need has been kind of the invisible hand, if you will, right? That's getting in so many people's ways, that's smoothing the path for other people. And so even when we were trying to push these other levers, right, make healthcare more accessible here, or like build a new clinic there, or introduce this new digital tool here, can you afford it, right, in time, but really in money and friction, and administrative burden has been such an incredible force. And so now I'm in that nitty gritty, and it's fascinating and just really meaningful in kind of surprising ways to be in all the time. Thanks much for having me here.
Absolutely. I envy you and very much don't envy you. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. All right, so I'm going to move on to Amira. You were in a couple of my DMBA classes and have a very varied background as a CMF designer and strategist. Maybe tell us a little bit about you, your background, and what you do today.
Yeah, so I'll start with today. So today I'm a strategist at a firm called Cactus, and we are an interdisciplinary firm that spans brand strategy, architecture, digital design, and many of our clients are healthcare systems, hospitals, health tech startups, and really what they come to us for is trying to figure out how to make this seemingly very inaccessible field in terms of from the consumer point of view, more accessible in terms of how, I'm sorry, my cat is trying to say words, but I'm going to try and get him away. But yeah, basically just trying to make these experiences accessible from a digital perspective, as well as from a physical spatial perspective. I ended up there kind of in just a whirlwind. I completed the DMBA pretty much because as my previous role, I was doing color and material design. And for those of you that don't know, color and material design is a subsect of industrial design and is basically where companies are looking to differentiate their products that are often commodified. Think of your cell phones and trying to differentiate themselves in terms of what color and material is applied to that. So really, I ended up in kind of a brand strategy space originally, where I'm applying these colors and materials, thinking about how a company can market themselves to a specific target audience through the colors and materials they use in those products, but then ultimately thinking really holistically about the whole experience of a brand just through the physical experience of that. And so when I tie those threads together of this kind of very material brand strategy side of the work that I've done in the past, and then looking towards the future in terms of hospital design and how patients might come into a space and think about what materials they're interacting with, what interfaces they're interacting with, and how that impacts their perception of the hospital brand experience. So yeah, thanks.
Very cool. Does that include smell?
Actually, yes, we get a lot of inspiration from hospitality, which has obviously been experimenting with perfumes and like specialized perfumes for their hotels. So yeah.
Very cool. I say ask because hospitals always have a very specific smell. So there you go.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. And last but definitely not least is Joyce. Really, every time I've uttered the term healthcare within our shared DMBA communities, the very first name that comes back to me is yours. And not always from you, right? Others are like, oh, you should ping Joyce really quick if you have that question. So maybe tell us a little bit about your background and what you do today.
All right, well, I'm so excited to be here with this panel. And my background, I mean, I've lived in the health ecosystem for more years than I'm needing to say. And so I've really spanned across the ecosystem, starting at the early days of wearables, before we even called it wearables, and then moved into a top 3 consulting firm where we focused so much on how to help these big organizations think about ways to use their data and data security and privacy. And from then I moved into an integrated payer provider model, so Kaiser Permanente, just like Camille, and there I really got a taste of like innovation and human-centered design, and worked on one of their signature projects, which was how to reimagine ambulatory care. And it was one of the, we didn't even care about our titles at that time, but it was program manager, IT track lead, innovation partner, and we just were assigned responsibility basically and told to deliver. But we ended up, and I ended up working and learning how to deliver not only virtual digital experiences, but in-person clinical experiences, working across the front of the house, the back of the house, and all of the systems to enable and make that happen. And so from there, I went to CCA, and then I came out and I was so inspired by strategic foresight. And so Justin, I look forward to talking about some of the work that I was able to do using those methodologies and tools, thinking about the future of robotic surgery and how do we push organizations to think, 10 years when they're so focused on that 1 to 3 year horizon. And then I joined a big payer model, which was, interesting at the time because it was trying to disrupt itself. And there I worked on, mostly new concepts. And so how could they redefine themselves? And then I left for a very short stint at an early stage digital, a telehealth company focused on MSK. And so when you ask, what am I doing? Well, I'm consulting and interviewing for my next strategic role within digital health transformation and innovation.
There you go. Always be designing the next thing. I love it. Thank you so much, all of you, and I appreciate that. So, so there's a lot that I think we can all talk about. So let me, before I move on to sort of the meat of our conversation and sort of the questions, here's sort of the, I'll call them the rules of the game for us as a panel, and then we can move on to the rules of the game for our participants and you know, the people who are watching. I'm gonna, as you know, I have questions, but rather than just throwing questions out and just, you know, seeing what shark eats that question first and bites and with blood in the water, I want to have a little bit more civilized. So I'm going to ask each of you a question, and we'll base it on a topic. But based on that, please, anyone who has something to add to it, or a reply or a retort, right? This doesn't have to be that civilized. We could certainly argue about things. There's no single right solution. There's only options here. So I'll read questions, and I think I'm going to start with Joyce. I'll ask you a question. But if someone else has a rejoinder or something else and wants to add to it, by all means, just jump right in. Don't wait for me to ask you your question. We can just move on. Sound good? Okay. So anyone else, attendees who are watching, if you have questions, by all means, put them in the Q&A, and then I think we don't have, you know, hours and hours worth of content. You know, we have a little bit. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and if we don't get to them, we'll try to get to them in a different way. Sound good? Okay, so here we go. So here's the most basic thing I want to start with is, you know, is this really is a loaded term, is design. And when you think about design, and specifically employing design methodologies to create, you know, products and strategies and so forth, I would love to hear from each one of you about the role that design plays in the company or the industry that you work in. And, you know, don't hold back. Think about all the ways that design methodologies play a part. And if each of you have done something here or a lot. So here, I'm going to start with you, Joyce. So what does design mean to you, and what role does it play in your current role as a consultant, or even at past organizations like Vori Health? And I'm going to add a little bit more. You're now looking at sort of design strategy. What role do you hope it plays, or that you want to design for in some said future? Right. There you go. Loaded, big.
Loaded. Okay. All right. I think I've got it. You know, in terms of design, you know, I was thinking about this, and for me, I kind of break it into three areas, because we get to choose, right? And we get to kind of manifest the future that we want. And so, you know, first of all, I think in terms of the organizations that I've worked at, you know, it's a process, right? And you know, an ideal process or preferable process is that it really spans the early stages of project definition. So it's business goals, framing the strategy, you know, what's desirable, is it feasible, viable, you know? And so I would almost say it's this tool that we use to facilitate our stakeholders so that we're really clear on business problem, just what are we trying to do here? And I think we can all share how, you know, sometimes you just get into that, we've got a task, but like design is so much more of this orchestration that starts in these early stages. And then in terms of like, you know, secondly, I would say there's a role in it. And I think a role or at least we hope that our business partners understand, is that we're uncovering what's going to make for us to be these competitive differentiators. So you could say we're creating and capturing value, creating for the business, creating for our patients, our consumers. You know, I know it's so debatable of how do we talk about healthcare. And then third is, and I was just listening to a podcast this morning as I was walking my dog, and I just loved the simplicity of thinking about something that we design that's understandable and it's pleasurable. And some of the work that I've gone in, we didn't talk about pleasure, but we talked about delight. and functional. And that then goes into your CSAT, your NPS, your CES, all of these measurements that really can help us understand, is it doing the job? So that's kind of it in terms of how I define it. And then I'd love to share, again, because of the DMBA, the strategic foresight. So I had the good fortune of working for kind of a spin-off of Singularity University. And these were subject matter expert in HCI, went around the world, talked all about it. She was brought in to help a robotics company that was not leading in the market. So no names here, just saying. And what was so interesting is we went through this exercise applying scenario modeling that really took into account some of the research that had surfaced. This was even before COVID, shortage of surgeons, challenges with education and ongoing training. What we ended up doing is not talking about the next generation of the robotic arm, but this work that we were able to do and deliver to the client helped them think about their platform strategy in terms of AI and how they could be a learning model and solve some of these bigger problems. So I really think that, design can be so strategic, and that's an example and point of, we could have talked about features and capabilities, but instead we were talking about this business, this opportunity that solves real world problems affecting their industry.
Right. I love that. So, and you're looking for these unmet needs, right? Even future unmet needs that we don't necessarily know we have right this second, but they're there, and we don't have a name for them. You give that name. I love that. Real quick before we move on, because I'm going to move on to Dana, but you mentioned okay, there's a tension between patient, customer, consumer, and I also heard you talk about competitive advantage. And when we talk about healthcare, here in the US, I'd love to have you expand a little bit, or any one of you expand on, what does competitive advantage mean? I have got a hospital or a provider of some kind who's providing health services to someone. What does competitive advantage mean? Competitive advantage mean in that case, if I'm a customer, I'm a patient?
I can take that, or if there's someone else that wants to jump in.
This is the blood in the water moment, so anyone can jump in. Go for it.
I'll follow you, Joyce.
Okay. I would say for a competitive advantage, the way in which we were different projects, and I'll try not to say, it was Anthem, and this ended up getting launched, but it was such an interesting conversation in that we were working with some leaders that just said, hey, we're below parity right now in this particular domain. And so why don't we just need to deliver to the basics. And in our innovation group, we said, actually, we want to go beyond. And so we had done enough research to come forth and say, the future of the onboarding experience, let's say. So they've already decided, I want to be a member of this payer group. And the basics are, you're going to fill out forms, you're going to get, or you're going to get accepted. But let's talk about what delights. And let's understand these pain points that exist today, like the wait time that it takes before their next year, before their effective date starts, and all of their medications that they have, that now they're worried because they're changing plans. So one of the differentiators is, how do we solve for that problem so that for day one, that effective date, that January 1st, that they're ready to go. We're already queued. Prescriptions are there. We're ready to help get them started, or they're shipped. Those are just some ways to talk about differentiation and delight that went far beyond what getting a plan, the basic parity.
Makes total sense. Camille, did you want to add something?
Sure. I think everything Joyce has said is correct, completely. And to add, I think healthcare, whether it should be or not, is a whole another panel, right? But is a business in the United States, right? It is very much a for-profit, humongously profitable business for many, 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 care delivery entities and middlemen and women. Many, 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 many middlemen and women. and all kinds of companies, right? And I think this isn't unique to design in healthcare, but design in lots of businesses is to really understand how your business works and kind of pitch what you want to do, like a lot of the things Joyce has been describing within that business framing, right? My business, like a lot of healthcare businesses, is B2B, and it works like a lot of B2B businesses. We sell, kind of a package of services to, in our case, employers that then goes to their members. They want certain things from us, right? They have like a parity. They want exactly what they could get in other places or more or better. They want us to help them save more money. All healthcare companies, right, that they would purchase from to save more money or to better serve their members or deliver a better experience, all kinds of things, and being able to position really meaningful change and more than parity and more than just what's required or what's, kind of happening today. I think the people who want to get that done are really successful by recognizing that they work within a business, for better or for worse, and often for worse, of course.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you mentioned that, and I just did a quick, while you're talking, this is business, right? And it is big business. In fact, it is, if you include health insurance, hospitals, and pharma in the US, it is the largest business industry by a lot, right? It's something like a $3+ trillion industry when you include those things together. So we're all here. Great. Thank you. So I'd like to move on to Dana. So Dana, you're representing the pharma in this case, right? And what does design mean to you, specifically coming from pharma?
Yeah, as I was listening to Joyce speak and Camille, there was, definitely some interesting themes there that I can hit on. The word that came to me when I heard your question, Justin, was evolved. When I think about, when I started out in this space and within the industry, it was very different from where we are today. And when I say that, I'm so sorry if you guys can hear that siren in the back. When I say that, drug discovery, for those who may not be as familiar, can take upwards of 15 years. Just in terms of the discovery piece and then actually navigating through the regulatory components that FDA mandates in terms of preclinical work and animal studies into clinical trials and all of that back and forth with the FDA in order to get the product approved. And that in itself was the accomplishment. 20 years later, right, and thinking about this competitive advantage that Joyce mentioned, what's a positive within this space is that you're no longer either first in class anymore. There are tons of competition and tons of data coming out. And so that actually really changes what perhaps we're thinking about within this space, where it may have just been sufficient to launch the product because you were the only one, or it was an unmet medical need for a very rare condition that someone was living with. That isn't the case anymore. There's tons of data and research coming in every day. And so now when I think about design, it's really not only celebrating the moment of getting the drug approved, but now what is that person living with the condition and their support system? What are those touch points for them? What's that experience? And from a design perspective, how do we optimize those experiences and those touch points to really make that a meaningful experience for the patient and their care team and their health ecosystem?
How much, thank you for that. How much in pharma do you see the business side wanting to have that experience be designed, in so much that they can do something with that, or, build new business models or strategies or whatever?
Yeah, I think there's a huge, whether they want to do that, we're definitely moving in that direction. How about that?
Okay.
And that is really because the competitive landscape has changed. And so now, building off of what Camille and Joyce were saying, you do need to differentiate from your competitors, and everyone might be making the same product or slightly different mechanism of action. And so perhaps your differentiator is in the services you offer or that experience that you offer. And so that is really where the industry has to move at this point.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Camille, I'd love to hear about design specifically from a startup perspective. Like, how is design being used or abused or eschewed in the healthcare startup space?
You know, people who work with me know that this is my answer to so many questions, but it really depends, actually.
That's
I
an
think probably
MBA answer, yeah.
right. Yeah, gonna hedge my bets a little. It really does depend, though. I've worked for 2 startups in healthcare, but I've partnered with lots and lots of them. At Kaiser, at my current company, sort of portfolios of, health tech startups, right? They really would lean on startups for some of the kind of innovation, if you will, that they were looking for to be a little bit more nimble, fast moving, iterative than some of the bigger guys can be. But it really depends. And I think one of the interesting things, in health sort of tech startups, right? I worked for one company that was a spin out of IDEO. So of course had design, very much in its DNA. And you could really tell, right? I mean, from the very top, the language, right? The words people would use to make requests, who was on my hiring team, the people I was brought in to be on the hiring teams of, right? It was very inclusive, very extensive. Interestingly, the UX research function, which I lead, wasn't in the design team, but was a sister team to design, which I actually thought was a really kind of a sign of design maturity almost, right? That it had just been kind of absorbed into the rest of the org and was really a strategic kind of partner in lots of ways. On my current company, really different, kind of more clinical and operational expertise founding. Design is very much a strategic partner, but it's different. And I think that, I don't know if this is, I'm sure lots of startups. I haven't worked in startups outside of healthcare because I've been in healthcare for so long, which is probably obvious, but I think one of the things in startups in particular that I see myself and hear from other folks kind of in similar positions in healthcare is, I forget who was mentioning this earlier, maybe Joyce. Data strategy is a big challenge in healthcare, especially for these younger teams, younger groups. There is a ton of data in healthcare. I think of part of my team's role, a huge part, maybe the most important part of my team's role, is to help figure out what to do effectively, ethically, efficiently, to use all the data that we have on behalf of our members, right? And data is just so fractured and so siloed in healthcare. Again, a whole nother panel we could go into. But I think that's a challenge that these younger and kind of teenage size startups have, is kind of what to do with it, how to make good use of it, effective, efficient, and also ethical, right? Far above and beyond kind of the bounds of what's required from like a regulatory standpoint. And I think design can play a huge role in that, like must play a huge role in that. And so we do. I think it's part of the role I'm hired to be, to kind of be in there doing, and I make it more and more of my role as soon as I.
Right. Like any good design strategist, you just
right.
keep
Yes.
taking things and making them better. Good. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you, Camille. All right. So I'm going to move on to Amira. You work for a firm that designs experiences, some of which are in hospitals. Tell us a little bit about, again, you mentioned it in your intro, but and I asked you about smell. Maybe take us a little bit further into that. Where does design show up, and what does it mean to you and your company and your role in designing for health and hospitals, things like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The 2 things came to mind with that question. And I think for my company right now, a big thing that we think about is how we trouble people's perspectives, people's assumptions about what a healthcare experience should be like. Like you mentioned, smell, that hospitals have a certain smell that you associate with them. And a lot of the work that we do is thinking about how it could be different, how it could perhaps be better, and think about really humanizing the experience of healthcare. I guess one thing that I'm thinking about also is that we're often dealing with people's the most difficult moments in their life, and trying to make those moments not just survivable, but something where like family members can be taken care of in terms of their mental health, their physical health, that the person who is suffering from an ailment also feels like they are supported in every way. And when you think about healthcare today, if you think, just close your eyes, imagine a hospital, like those needs are not being met. So really for us, what we go in and do is that we're talking to people who are patients, we're talking to people who are providers across all different kinds of specialties, and really just understanding what their day-to-day is, and then figuring out where obviously those unmet needs are, and how to address them in a way that obviously makes sense with the hospital's business model, and also possibly, as everyone on the panel has mentioned before, it differentiates them from other competitors in their local markets, right? Hospitals are often kind of community centers in the places that they're existing in, and so they're not just like, it's not kind of a arbitrary business. It's a place that people really associate with a location. I guess one last thing that I wanted to say is, I saw a question in the chat, which I know that I'm not supposed to be speaking over there, but it's from my classmate Chris, and whom I love, so I thought I would address it. So one of the things that comes up a lot with clients, often again hospital systems, is there are many new entrants in the healthcare world that are not legacy hospital systems. So these are your Amazons, your Forwards, your Apple. Apple is a huge, one could call like kind of new threat in the healthcare space. And many of these hospital systems are coming to us basically asking how they can address those threats and address these questions that many patients and many quote unquote customers or consumers are coming to them with about how they can integrate this new Apple Watch or this new like healthcare tech that they're experiencing or finding in the market into their day-to-day lives. And so a lot of what we do is trying to think about and think ahead about what are the ways that these hospital systems that are truly like hundreds of years old in some places can start to really compete with the Amazons, the Apples of the world, and maybe not just compete, but also possibly integrate with those technologies.
I think it's interesting to bring up, we keep talking about design and, going to consumers and right, the patients, for instance, and asking questions. This is going to be also a segue into the pitfalls here. All right, in healthcare, unlike a consumer device, where I'm holding up an iPhone, but it doesn't really matter, watch, whatever. Unlike a consumer device where we could just go ask someone, hey, how does it work for you? How does it make you feel? What's your experience? Walk me through your day, working out. I take it in healthcare, right? There's all these regulations, right? The regulatory environment and frameworks in healthcare are like, second to none, except for maybe banking. When you talk about Amira, but also Dana, Joyce, Camille, like when you think about this design and asking people questions and trying to get from them what their experience is, where do these regulations pop up? Like, how much of that can you do realistically? Or where do you notice I'm flying too close to the sun and my wings are beginning to melt? What does that look like? I'd start with you, Amira, because you're designing experiences in hospitals. Like, how does that look? What does it look like to go get feedback from people, real people? And where do you have to sort of stop?
Yeah, I mean, from my experience so far, I would say my team has been pretty good at really working directly with our clients to basically source folks to talk to who have been kind of vetted and I guess you could say like approved to talk to us, which has its like positives and negatives, where it's not kind of a a random sample. But I guess in terms of just the general pitfalls of the kind of work that I do is that we're not in-house, right? Like we're working with a client who's going to take the work that we're building, both the strategy and then some of, I guess, the conceptualizations that we have around the architecture or the space or the digital design. And they're going to take it and try to integrate it into their existing systems however best they can. And if I imagine there are a lot of designers in the room who have had the experience of having a pristine design kind of handed off to the execution team, whether it be like an engineering team. I love engineers, but that relationship is going to be exciting for the rest of history. Sometimes the vision that the designers come up with, or that the strategists come up with, does not end up actually being as, I guess, visionary or beautiful once it comes out the other end. It actually needs to be made functional and HIPAA compliant and all of that. So I think, kind of long story short, is that the main drawback, I think, from my perspective, is oftentimes we need to figure out how to bring the vision of like this beautiful design vision closer to reality, and maybe also question like, okay, we have these systems in place that are obviously for the protection of patients and for the protection of privacy, but also look at them and see how we can adapt these beautiful designs, these beautiful visionary ideas to actually work with those.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes total sense. All right, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper. Go ahead, Camille, were you good about to add to it?
Yeah, I think Amira is spot on. Like healthcare is, we would talk in a past role about like our goal is not to necessarily push this experience, into the future, like as if we were starting in this calendar year, but to pull this experience from like 1994 to like 2008. And that would be, like huge progress in healthcare, right? Like there are fax machines everywhere still. There is not functional Wi-Fi in a lot of medical buildings. Like there are these, actually experienced this morning going to go get a COVID test. We couldn't scan the QR code on the test we were trying to buy because the Wi-Fi in the building didn't work. And that just happens, right? And so this translation, what Amira is talking about from like the ideal thing that we want to see happen into just the reality of the way that it all works out there, is I think something every designer who works in healthcare and actually stays in healthcare will experience. And you kind of have to like it, like that weird, painful transition process, because it's going to happen every time. And if it bums you out too much, I think, you'll find something else to do eventually.
Yeah. What's cool about that is it sounds a little bit like there's lots of small wins in there, right? Or maybe they're big wins in healthcare. To anyone else, they would be, small wins, like, oh, thank God we're now at 2008. But it sounds like in healthcare, it's like, yeah, we did it. Like, okay, we're making progress.
Can I add something to that real quick?
Please, yeah.
I was just thinking how I think one of the most disappointing things is when the change is cosmetic, where it's like, okay, we have these beautiful, like hip new aesthetics that are very in vogue for right now, but like the processes and the systems in place are still, as Camille was saying, like truly decades old. And I think the goal is not just to have it aesthetically look like it is of the moment or of the future, but functionally also like following through with that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Justin, I'd love to build off of that a little bit from the biotech pharma space, because in theory, it sounds like, oh, if you wanted to change a button, that would be pretty straightforward and easy. And in the pharma biotech space, not so much. For those who may not be as familiar, I want to shed a little light on what happens once a product hits the market. I mentioned, that discovery phase takes quite a bit. And then there are significant regulations once the product is on the market. So for those of you who are on the call, curious how many people read a package insert that comes with your medication. And you may not be aware of this, but that is a negotiation between the FDA and the manufacturer of the drug on what is considered approved messaging for your drug product that you put on the market. And so that is essentially the confines or the constraints of what you can say about your product. And so for those who have read that, it's not very user-friendly. It's certainly not when you think of health literacy at a 5th grade or less level. And so within the pharma space, that is what we're having to navigate in terms of how do you take this, and this is essentially what you can say, and put it in a patient-friendly experience. You layer onto that, that anything once the product is on the market, even if it's disease education, is considered promotional in nature. And what gets coupled with the promotional aspect of this work is something that we have to be aware of, which is inducement. And we need to ensure that we are not inducing anyone to purchase or prescribe a medication that you make, because that can be considered, of course, unlawful. And there was a lot of scrutiny in the pharma space many years ago around these types of behaviors. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services several years ago actually created what we refer to within the industry as sunshine reporting. And it requires physicians to actually disclose how much they make on an annual basis from medical device companies and pharmaceutical manufacturing companies, which is totally separate from their day job. So Justin, I think your initial question was, how do you even speak to these customers? And I will say you can, it's possible. And you know, when you're thinking about that, there are some of these questions that you really have to uncover. What is the need? Have we engaged with these customers before? Why? What's that threshold for payment because of sunshine reporting or concerns around inducement? When you think about, you know, how we all do research, and Amira mentioned patients, and it's a group who's been selected. Yeah, you have to think about, is it a blinded study, single blinded, double blinded? And what are those optics there in terms of how you might engage? So a lot of different constraints just to include when you're doing your planning and timelines, but I will say it's definitely possible.
Right. That goes deep. That well goes deep. You know, it makes me think, you know, and we don't have to talk about pitfalls this whole time. I do want to move on to a couple strategic wins or something else, right? By the way, we've already been going for 40 minutes, so I think we're doing okay. I'd love to ask, you know, Camille, something you brought up during one of our calls was that, you know, and this is very specific to what we're talking about now, and design and customer interviews and so forth, and like trying to glean information from our customers, our patients, right? You said basically that unless someone other than the designer is showing up to patient or customer interviews, design itself is simply not valued, specifically in that space. Maybe tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that also kind of reflects on a little bit of what, not what Dana's saying, but kind of even the industry and how it's set up. So maybe expand a little bit.
Sure. Thanks, Justin. I think there are a couple of things in there. One of the things I want to build on actually is something Amira was saying about, you know, a big part of probably most of our jobs, and certainly any of us who are actually like leading research in this space, talking to people about their healthcare experiences, you know, are sort of stewards of, right, or facilitating people talking about sometimes the worst moment of their lives, right? I mean, some healthcare events that happen or things that happen in care settings and hospitals are bar none the worst moments of people's lives. And then they range, you know, to like delightful or somewhere in between, you know, just like a little bit annoying or a little bit of friction, right? But any interview you walk into, you kind of don't know what you're going to get. Actually, you might think it's about, you know, are the hold times for this customer support line appropriate? And you end up hearing about, again, like the single worst moment of somebody's life, right? And you have to be there and present and kind of ready for that wherever that conversation goes. And, you know, I think I was trying to reflect, like, what did I mean when I said that? And I think that it leads right into like, how do you make these things happen? I think I saw in the chat that somebody had a hard time like getting permission or getting access to talk to patients. And in organizations where, say, the legal team, for example, is not as familiar with the skill and experience and expertise, the sort of ethical requirements and guidelines, right? The people who do this kind of research and not just clinical research. For folks who aren't familiar, in clinical research that's leading to, like, say, drug approval or device approval or for publication, you go through a process called an IRB approval. So there's like a governing body who's responsible for making sure you're doing the right thing, that the folks who are participating in your research are informed about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what it's for, how their inputs can be used, all these things. Those same regulations actually don't apply to the kind of research that we do often when it's about like a digital experience or, you know, hold times for a support line or many of the other elements of healthcare that we work on to design and improve. And yet the ethical bar for us is still as high. Again, you know, we aim higher often. So I think that kind of two things I'd unpack there are, one, to sort of get that access, right? Your role is to really make sure that the folks who are in your organization understand what it is you're doing, how you go about it, what your guidelines and rules and requirements and boundaries are, how you make use of the data that's generated there, what you do if things go off the rails, if you hear about something that's not working that needs to be escalated, if they take the conversation somewhere it wasn't meant to go, you know, all of these things, right? You have to have accounted for, and make sure that the people who can get you that access and sort of approve that access understand. And I would say by and large, then, you know, you can get it with some dependencies as always. The other thing, and I think the heart of what you're getting at is, I feel pretty strongly that if you're going to be in a decision-making position about things that help people get access to the care they need, pay for the care they need, like sometimes life-saving care, sometimes like nice to have care, it kind of doesn't matter, right? Like it's healthcare. In my mind, you should have what you need. And if you're going to be in any kind of decision-making position, which product managers, program managers, project managers, everybody directly and indirectly who works in a healthcare organization, for the most part, has some kind of influence, right, on the thing that gets to people. And I feel pretty strongly that unless you spend time with the people that you're serving, whether it's facilitated by somebody like me, or, you know, kind of you want to do the work to set it up yourself with support, again, following those guidelines and requirements, probably you shouldn't be there, right? If you know, I saw another comment about people who want, you know, to do this mission-driven thing, you know, to work on something impactful. And I hear that all the time, right? And what I would say is like, absolutely, healthcare is the place to do that. Come on over. It's amazing and fantastic. And, you know, there's a lot of like very unsexy, time-consuming, regulatory navigating, kind of ethical, you know, philosophical guideline pondering work that is required, I think, to do a really good job in this space, far and beyond what's, you know, the regulatory sort of bounds are. So if you don't see folks, you know, I hear all the time like, oh, I trust you, you're the research leader, I'll just wait for your insights. And a big part of my job is to then say like, amazing. And how about I see you, you know, next Tuesday? I've set up these calls. Can't wait to see you there. It's going to be amazing. You know, I'll bring a sandwich, you know, whatever it is. So yeah.
I like the sandwich part. I'll be there. Joyce, you've run design strategy at Anthem, right? Big organizations like this, and you know, but also recently left. Maybe tell us a little bit about the pitfalls as you see them. Are they any different than what you've heard so far?
No, I think, you know, just to comment on some of the other feedback around access, you know, there's, you know, I would say one, you know, there are ways, right? And it really depends on the relationships that you have across the organization. So I think within Kaiser, it was so much easier because we were the model. So we go into our hospitals, we could find those innovation partners and, you know, when I worked for a large payer, you know, you thought about it, we needed to get access to the patients that were getting care that were part of another system. It was more complicated. So it worked a lot easier with entities that we owned versus when we were trying to negotiate with another health provider and take their members, so to speak, or their patients because they're our members. And then, of course, there's just a plethora of businesses that will recruit patients that are de-identified, and you know, you can de-identify yourself and really understand how to get perspective on pieces of the healthcare journey. But I think what you were asking, you know, and like, is there a different perspective that I would offer in terms of some of the challenges? You know, one thing I was thinking about is even in the roles that I've sat in at Anthem that were, you know, where we had strong partnerships, strong leaders, you know, what I always thought was interesting is, you know, these timelines are sort of assembled in advance. And you've got, you know, this line item, this on the bar chart, whatever. But when you get into it and you're like, oh, wait a second, you know, we're now needing to get data from these various disparate sources. We're needing to understand and synthesize, because you're really your strategic partners that are taking an evidence-based approach that's qual and quant, some that we're getting from the business, some that we're orchestrating ourselves. You know, and then if you think about it's the framing of the questions, the conducting the research, the synthesis of the information, and then we start to go into opportunity. So going through that whole phase, and you're system level thinkers, right? So it's not, to Amira's point earlier, where it's cosmetic. I mean, that's like simply, that's the so we're really looking at what are the systems that are going to enable the success of what our goals are. And so what I would say is it becomes very challenging then to do this iterative process that really gets us to the goals that we want. And so the top line would be innovation partners and technology partners are so essential to this process, because they can really help kind of close these gaps of tight timelines. So I guess that's a way, Justin, of kind of saying problem and way to fix it.
Yeah.
But you need the budget. You need the budget.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. Well, that's also a perfect segue, because I'd also love to hear about what are some of the opportunities there, right? I mean, okay, regulatory frameworks and constraints, yes, right? Constraints are great for design, by the way, right? We love constraints in design. But that also means like, okay, great. That means, okay, there must be plenty of opportunities. You just mentioned some, Joyce. Maybe expand a little bit on, like, if someone's going in, you know, into or thinking about healthcare now or pharma, you know, we'll move on to Dana as well. Like, what opportunities exist and what should people be looking for?
You know, I would say I'd love to work on projects where we're reframing the conversation. You know, for a while it was like diagnosis and treatment. And like, oh, there's preventative, but it's kind of boxed into like what coverage allows. And maybe it's also the point where I'm at in my life and where my friend circles are. It's why don't we start to think about a world in which we're talking about optimal health? And do we even know like how to verbalize that? Because we don't have like set visits for optimal health visits. You pay for those out of pockets and you go to like your functional care doctors. And so if we think outside of the system, I was thinking, and I was also just brought in on a project a couple of weeks ago to kind of fantasize about this. It was really around, you know, how do we provide insights, insert where, right? Like, how do we provide insights so that for me, I've got all this data that's like my wearable, my phone, things that I offer information to. And what I would really like, I do appreciate Apple telling me that I've not moved enough today, but but I would really like to have a framework in which I can start to foster what optimal health is, and then start to have all this data that exists out there to start to give me insights that's using this information. So I guess like where I think about some real big opportunities is this optimal health space that's leveraging the power of big data, that's going and giving insights. And then there's this learning model so that those insights can feed back in and really make for a better health.
Outcomes, yeah, whole thing, system. Amira, you had mentioned also something about, you know, in one of our calls, you also mentioned about sort of going further. I'll actually even read what you said. You said something about basically that you're really interested in how healthcare has historically integrated advanced digital interfaces into physical spaces. Yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about where you see that strategic opportunity, right? I think Joyce is sort of saying some of that, which is, hey, how can we capture even any kind of data, right? How can we capture that data from the source somehow and do something with it to improve experiences? And there's opportunity there. Yeah, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I'm actually going to quote the founder of the company I work for, Cactus. who often talks about how, like in healthcare right now and for the past years, many of the technologies that exist are for professional use. So you have these very, very high tech MRI machines, imaging machines, diagnostics. You have robotic arms that can conduct, that physicians can use to conduct surgery. And all of those are very much facing the professional side and folks who are trained over years and years and years to use them. And I think where the opportunities are and where like the conversations that I have with the team I work on often land on is how can we make the information and the knowledge available to people on the patient side of that equation. Right. So they're also informed and empowered to make choices. This is maybe a bit more philosophical, but healthcare is very top down in the way that it currently works in terms of you go to the doctor tells you what is wrong with your body, and then you leave and you obviously trust them because of their years and years and years of medical experience. But I think thinking about what Joyce is talking about, how can we give patients enough information that they can kind of see, I guess, the entire picture of their health as informed by all of that kind of experience and knowledge. And I guess maybe I should make a very clear disclaimer that I'm not talking about just going on your own and like making health decisions for yourself without the information from a healthcare professional. But I do think that there is a really big opportunity there for how folks can have access to healthcare information and be educated in a way that they can make informed decisions.
Yeah, totally get it. I love it. I want to go to Dana specifically because I also, having again had many drinks with you and some nice dinners and so forth, and we, you strike me as someone who's like always going to, keep pushing for something if it's the right thing to do, irrespective of how many times you're rebuffed, right? And you're going to maybe rename things. You're going to try to get design going. So what would you tell someone who's looking for that strategic design career, specifically in pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, I love that you've picked that up over our drinks and dinner.
Oh, I mean, you're a New Yorker. That's the way it works. I get it. I come from that.
Hopefully you all walk away from tonight in hearing, my representation of pharma and biotech and recognize that it is really complex. And it's a lot of finding those loopholes in the complexity and navigating through those regulations. The regulations are very gray. It would be helpful sometimes if it felt like they were black and white, and that really locks you in. And so there's a lot of gray and a lot of room for interpretation. So we've talked a lot today about strategizing and problem solving, and that is really key to navigating within the biotech pharma space. The other thing that I would say, and this is a personal reflection of mine, to be able to have an impact and perhaps change one person or their care system, supporting them and their lives as they're navigating a very difficult diagnosis, feeling, like they're losing hope, to be able to impact that in any way and have them feel a bit more hopeful and empowered about their treatment decision and how they're going to navigate their treatment. It's incredibly rewarding. And if that is at all what drives you, definitely come on over.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge, by the way, that, we've been talking and I still have like 50 questions that I could ask, but I'm not going to ask 50 questions. I'm going to move to the Q&A. I'm going to try to ask, we'll start with one. There was a little bit of upvoting going on. This was from Jian Wei. When designing for medical devices for patients, a main challenge that they faced was the lack of access to patients' feedback due to patient privacy rules, protections, other things like that. What are some of the methods to go about gathering feedback from patients specifically for things like medical devices? Any ideas?
I mean, I can turn. I feel like Joyce and I have both hit on this a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So without knowing more kind of specifics about the situation, I think it can just speak to what I have experienced, which is, I think, like I was saying earlier, maybe just a not understanding, right, about like, why is this feedback necessary? I think like regulatory, privacy, compliance, legal, organizational partners are always going to try to toe the line as conservatively as possible, the way they understand it. And one of the many things that requires is like only gathering the feedback that you need, right? And I think our challenge is to make it clear why design, capital N, needs feedback the same way that, say, the clinician lead would, right? For like how a device, I did a lot of work for a while in a space where we worked with implanted devices, right? The surgeons who were implanting those devices needed feedback about placement and comfort and all of these things, right? And it was really obvious why they needed that feedback. It was maybe less obvious why the team that was in charge of like patient experience and engagement and like satisfaction needed feedback the same way. And our job as sort of design strategy leads is to make it just really exceptionally clear that A, we are as aware of and respectful of the same, kind of regulatory and ethical considerations as everybody else, if not more. And B, we, capital N, need feedback and are going to put it to use the same way that everybody else will, and unfuzz this notion of like experience and engagement, turn it from something that's like nice to have and like fluffy and fun to like as important to the experience of receiving a device or using a device as almost anything else.
Yeah, I think that's really salient. I mean, what you're speaking to there in some ways, Camille, is this is like the scientific method, right? And if you could bring it back as science, like, yeah, this is going to help our patients and experience. And we're going to use science to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe it becomes a little bit
and use
easier.
their language,
and
right?
use their
like,
language, yeah.
Design research and like, ethnography and like all of these things that we do, which are very rigorous, mean nothing to people who've been working in this space for a really long time often. So listen to what they say, right? Like read about clinical research, read about all of the words that they're used to hearing, and make sure that you're couching what you're asking for and proposing in those terms, because you're going to hear no at first. I still do all the time, right?
Yeah.
And then taking that conversation farther in a really respectful and collaborative and kind of like partnership oriented way. And you will more than likely be successful.
Love it.
I'd also add there, and I totally agree, Camille. And when you're in the biotech pharma space, as Camille is alluding to, they may not really understand that. And there's always a way. And so I think really thinking about it without the context here, recognizing that, there may be confidentiality and proprietary information. And so how do you set yourself up to have some type of contract in place where a patient is aware of that and signing something where that proprietary information isn't disclosed. And then, the privacy piece and the personal identifiable information, it is really important. And so perhaps thinking through then what will you use with that data? Joyce mentioned like collect only what you need. And then what are the steps afterwards? Who's going to have access to that research and those insights? And then what will you do with that? And so really think through some of those questions as you're having those conversations with legal or regulatory or your compliance partners, prepared so that they can understand what the plan is there.
Love it.
If it helps, it's like to the point, right? That like I have in my research flow, I have documents in one place that include names and identifying information that like 3 people in the company can see, right? Some information is extracted from there and put in another place that is also very secure. It includes less information. It's no longer identifiable. And then it is like manually reviewed and extracted again to another place, right? Where like more people can actually kind of see it and work with it. Think like Miro, this type of thing, right? So like by the time it has moved from like raw source through these steps that our legal and privacy and compliance team like co-designed, with me and see and understand. And also I would say see how seriously we take this, by looking at this flow that we put together, kind of going to make your ask with all of this sort of pre-thought out, I think will take you a long way as well.
All right, I'm just gonna close this out with a couple of things. One is I want to do a really quick lightning round. Ask each one of you if there are any current podcasts, books, or other resources people should go to learn more or to get excited about working in healthcare and pharmaceutical industries. Jump in, go. Camille.
There are two like newsletters that I get and always read, and one is from Rock Health. They do a great sort of like digital health review and roundup. They have some really great researchers who lead a lot of their stuff. And as far as just like what is up in the industry, also fabulous job board. Highly recommend Rock Health stuff just for what is happening in digital health today, all the time. And then there's a great sort of like blog thought leader. He runs like some courses, any number of stuff. This guy Nikhil, who runs a thing called the Out of Pocket blog, and it really kind of takes a slightly nittier grittier deep dive into like how does healthcare actually work, and just a slightly different lens into like what is going on here. Another great resource for both information, a pulse, and jobs if you're looking for them.
Excellent. How about you, Joyce?
Yeah, I'll just add, there's a podcast that's called Creating a New Healthcare, and I love that. It's New Earth is the last name of the podcast creator and facilitator, but that goes over, I just listened to one on the founder of a telehealth organization. It's just really interesting because he is thinking about and trying to facilitate and host people and have conversations around what's in disruption. Echoing Camille on Rock Health, it's local, it's Bay Area local. It's really interesting to see where funding is hitting and where it's not. And then if you can, the Vegas, there's a conference that's happening soon in Vegas. It's the Health HLTH. And I know they've been posting more on LinkedIn. I'm going to be going to that. I'm really excited. And so those are just a couple to kind of put out there. The Digital Health Futurist is another, because it's advancing the conversation far from like status quo from the 1970s or 80s, as Camille referenced earlier, 90s maybe it was, but still. So those are just a few.
Perfect. You, Dana.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific to healthcare, but I will. I'll share some things that I always anchor to. For people who haven't perhaps read it yet, Mismatch by Kat Holmes is something that I really anchor to when I think about change management within the space that I'm in, and how you get people to think a bit differently about that. And then a podcast that was recommended to me, which isn't so much about healthcare, but a lot of entrepreneurs and COOs. It's called Grit. I always listen to that and feel very inspired and pumped up after listening to those interviews.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you. All right. And Amira, I saw you sort of frantically because there was something you were reading that you were interested in. Go for it. What is it?
It's not gonna
we
let
can't
me
see
show
it.
it.
No.
Oh no. So it's a book and also a podcast called Health Design Thinking, which is co-written by Bon Ku and Ellen Lupton. And I really love this book. Just whenever I'm stuck in a project, I just go through. It has some really, really great case studies on how to design health products, health experiences, and also just takes you through the process and some considerations for designing for healthcare.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and especially our panelists, Amira, Dana, Camille, and Joyce. Thank you so much for hanging out and for having this great discussion. We could have gone, I'm sure, for another hour, but we don't need to do that. So I'm going to hand it over to, I think, Helen Maria and Nina and Trey to close it out. And again, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.